Hi, good to
Good
see
morning.
you. Thanks for joining us. What are we making of what we're hearing about the Bank of England saying they're not going to offer any more support to pensions after Friday? Are we worried?
I think it is worrying. There's obviously been a level of volatility again in the markets, and people are obviously worried about the cost of borrowing continuing to increase, least of all mortgage payers who are struggling with very high payments at the moment. So I think it is clearly worrying, but all of this is a response to the fact that the Bank of England has had to step in 3 times now to try and stabilise the markets after the mini budget. The quickest and simplest way to deal with this is for this government that has crashed the economy and loaded the costs onto working people to reverse the mini budget and provide some calm and stability in the markets again.
Yesterday, I spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister. She said that the economy was on track. And then I spoke to the Business Secretary today, and he says there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the spectacle of a business secretary touring the TV studios this morning trying to convince people that pension funds are safe. This is a really serious situation and a very bad situation for the government to have got themselves into. This is a crisis that was made in Downing Street. It was a deliberate decision to announce £43 billion worth of unfunded commitments, not to publish an independent assessment alongside that, as is normally the case. It spooked the markets, it's pushed borrowing costs up. It's had a major impact on families across the country and businesses, particularly mortgage payers, who've seen their mortgages rise by an average of £500 every month as they come off fixed-term mortgages. The government needs to go back to the drawing board urgently and start again.
But the Business Secretary is saying, as far as pension funds are concerned, they're safe as houses, if you'll forgive the pun, but if they do go under, it's because they're taking to a higher risk.
Well, all of this is caused by the government, and there's every attempt that I've seen on your show, Kay, yesterday with Therese Coffey and today with Jacob Rees-Mogg to blame other people just doesn't stick. In the end, that shock to the system came directly after the budget announcement. We've continued to see that instability, and it's a British problem. It's not a global problem. It's a problem for British families who are paying much higher mortgage costs, and the government needs to go back to the drawing board, start again, properly fund their commitments, stop undermining the independence of independent institutions that help to bring calm and stability to the markets, and stop asking working people to pay the price for a crisis that they've created.
There isn't enough money. I think we all agree on that. So there isn't enough money for nurses' pay increases.
Well, there's a whole set of problems here. The first is that we've had a decade of very sluggish growth. We've had the slowest growth in the G7 post-pandemic, and that's a consequence of not having invested, which is part of the reason why at our conference we set out plans to invest in clean energy and infrastructure and get this country working again. But we've also got this problem of an economy that has been crashed by the government. So we've got soaring inflation rates, and that's putting pressure on people's pay packets as well. The best way that you can deal with this, and the way that a Labour government would deal with this, is to scrap this mini budget, properly fund and cost all our commitments, which we've done, but the government hasn't. Respect the independence of institutions like the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility, which are there to bring stability and calm to the markets and not push up the cost of borrowing, and then go out and get money back into people's pockets through good jobs and wages. But that's the alternative that is on offer for Britain right now, and that's why yesterday Keir Starmer said he was putting the Labour Party on an election footing, not because there's a lot at stake for Labour, but because there's so much at stake for the country.
I want to ask you about the election budget in just a second, but, you know, the mini budget is about 45 billion. We're already 60 billion in the hole. That's going to get even worse. There's no more money for pay rises.
Well, part of the reason there's no money for pay rises is because the cost of borrowing has gone up and the government is now spending more to service debt. That's why we've said the first thing that they've got to do before they make any other commitments is go back to the drawing board, scrap this mini budget and start again and properly fund and cost their commitments. That's what we're going to do. We haven't gone out making commitments that this country can't afford because it's people's money. They haven't got a lot of it, and we're going to be careful with every single penny.
And would there be enough for pay rises for nurses?
Well, look, I've been absolutely clear with you on this show before, and I'll continue to be clear that this country needs a pay rise. And when we clapped for nurses and carers during the pandemic, we meant it. But what I'm not going to do is sit in this studio and try to conduct some kind of pay negotiation. The government hasn't opened the books to us. We don't know what the state of the NHS finances are. are, but I can tell you that when we're in government, if people trust us to take the reins and to try and sort this mess out, what we'll do is sit down with our workforce and negotiate our way through this to treat them as partners in British endeavour, not as enemies to be attacked and undermined.
What do you mean by an election footing?
Well, when Keir Starmer was first elected a couple of years ago, he said that the first task of his premiership was to make Labour fit to govern again. And we did that. We tackled anti-Semitism. We've dealt with a lot of the internal problems in the party. Then he said to us, we've got to go out and show people we're ready to govern with a plan for Britain. And that's what this conference was all about, setting out big plans for clean energy, homegrown energy, more security, more money in people's pockets. What he said yesterday is we've got to get on an election footing because an election could come at any time. This is the most unstable government that I've seen. The mood in Parliament amongst Tory MPs is pretty mutinous. We have no idea when a general election is going to come, but it could come at any moment, and we've got to be ready because there's so much at stake for this country.
It'd be bonkers to call an election now.
I mean, I would suggest to you that they would be bonkers to announce £43 billion worth of unfunded spending commitments and refuse to publish an independent impact assessment of that, and then double down over the course of their conference, series of U-turns, but doubling down on the idea that you can just keep spending money you don't have. So I think this government could do anything at any moment. It's the most unstable government, I think, of my lifetime, and so we've got to be ready.
Let me take you back to the Governor of the Bank of England and what he has been saying. We've heard both from Kwasi Kwarteng and indeed from the Prime Minister during the election campaign for the leader. They were both critical of Andrew Bailey. When we had Rees-Mogg on a little bit earlier, he was tiptoeing through the raindrops. What does Labour think about it?
I'm not going to criticise the Governor of the Bank of England because we've seen what happens when you attack and undermine the independence of institutions that are independent for a reason. They're there to provide calm and stability. And what we've seen in the last few weeks is the extraordinary spectacle of the Bank of England having to step in 3 times to deal with a government that has crashed the economy and manufactured a crisis that working people are paying for. What the Governor of the Bank of England is clearly trying to do is bring some calm and stability back to the market and to shore up the bond market so that we don't see pension funds collapsing. He needs to be given space to get on with that. But what we most need to see is a government that recognises the mess that they've made, goes back to the drawing board and starts again.
He says he's had lots of sleepless nights of late. Andrew Bailey, what about you?
A lot, yeah. I mean, a couple of reasons why. One is that post the budget, my office, like most MPs' offices, was flooded with people, particularly mortgage payers, people seeing their housing costs going up, as well as their food, as well as their energy prices, and just not knowing how they're going to survive this winter. But also because I know how much is at stake, that we have got to go out and show people that we can be trusted to govern again. I think people are starting to believe that again. I would never have thought that 3 years ago when we had our worst election defeat in 100 years, but there's so much at stake for this country, and we've got to go out and make sure that we offer the change that is needed. Your leader
will be at the dispatch box, I'm guessing, a little bit later on, facing Liz Truss. One wonders what tack he might adopt. Might he mention the Arsenal again in his speech?
I have absolutely no idea what he's going to do today. What I do know is that he's really concerned about what is happening to families up and down this country. And the biggest thing that we want the government to do is to scrap this mini budget and go back to the drawing board. So I suspect you'll see a lot of that from Keir Starmer later, but I suspect as well that you might see quite a bit of it from the Tory backbenches.
We'll see.
Thanks
Have you got any intel on that?
Well, just that I've been in Parliament for yesterday after the conference recess, and I think there is a very sombre mood amongst Conservative MPs, particularly, you've got the Rishi Sunak supporters who feel very much like a party within a party at the moment. They're very unhappy about the direction of travel. They don't seem to know what to do about it. We'll be calling on Tory MPs to really stand up for the interests of the country. We all know that they've got to scrap this mini budget. We know that they've got to start again. We know they've got to deal with working people shouldering most of the costs for those decisions. And I hope that we can persuade a lot of those Tory MPs to stand up for the interests of Britain and do the right thing.
OK, it's good to see you as always, Lisa and Nandy. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot.